Yeah, so I'm going to talk about this is kind of the other side of the intersection of crypto and quantum, which is actually quantum protocols that leverage quantum computing and quantum information to accomplish tasks that are impossible. And this is one that has been kind of a passion of mine for the last years. So what is quantum money? Well, quantum money seeks to solve the following problem, which I'll call the double spend problem. So we have someone here who has a bank account, and they're going to be nefarious, and they're going to try to spend it at, give it to a house and bought goods or something else. So we want to prevent our attacker from spending the same money twice. So they're obviously we have classical solutions to this problem. One is physical currency. Classical solution. So here your banknote is something like, or maybe it's coinage, maybe it's made out of gold or some other precious metal, or maybe it's the paper money we have today, but it's very hard to convincingly copy this because we don't know the recipe for making the paper and how to put the anti-counterfeiting. So with physical currency, the underlying assumption is just that it's impossible or at least too expensive. And then we also have digital settlements, things like wire transfers, what our credit card does, some popular cryptocurrencies. And these work over using digital communication as opposed to physical goods. But their underlying problem is that you all need a trusted third party to make sure that the money is actually yours to spend. In the case of a credit card, it would be maybe the credit card company in your bank. In the case of cryptocurrencies, it's the whole blockchain network. But in any case, you always with digital currency, you always need to have someone, maybe it's a decentralized entity, or maybe it's a bank, to verify it. Okay, but this will hopefully change once quantum enters the picture. And kind of the founding principle here is going to be the component theorem, which is if you are given an unknown quantum state, it's impossible for you to create two copies of that state. So around 50 years ago, Weizmann came along and said, well, hey, we can use this idea to build money. So the unknown quantum state is now going to be the currency. And the state is known to the mint because they made the money, but it's not going to be known to the public. And because it's not known to the public, it's impossible for anyone in the public to take that banknote and create two banknotes. All right, but the problem is that it's actually a little unclear what the advantage is over, say, classical digital currency. And the reason is that, well, the state is unknown to the public. That's the whole reason why it's impossible to clone it. But because it's unknown to the public, it's also unclear how to verify it. So if Alice goes to Bob with a banknote, Bob just sees a quantum state. He doesn't know if it's the correct quantum state that's supposed to represent the valid banknote, or if Alice just made up her own qubits and sent them off. He has really no way to tell an honest quantum money state from a dishonest quantum money state. So his only option is to send the money state that he got from Alice to the net, or maybe some trusted entity that wants to know the actual description of the state. And if you know the description of the state, you actually could check. You could project onto the way to make sure that you actually do get the correct. So the mint will verify, but Bob can't verify on his own. And so it's a little unclear at this point what the advantage over just a classical digital currency is, where we also needed to communicate with someone to verify things. What the ideal solution to the problem that put forth by Scott Aronson is something called public key quantum. And just roughly the idea of public key quantum money is that we're going to give out some way to the public to enable them to actually verify our banknotes. So Bob, when receiving a banknote from Alice, can actually test for himself without involving the mint whether that banknote is a valid quantum money state or whether it's just garbage. Now the mint can create new banknotes. They're the only one that can create new banknotes. So that, even though the public has the ability to verify, we want to still somehow prevent them from actually creating the money or copying existing. And there are numerous other advantages of public quantum money that I won't really go into. For example, you can actually solve the problem of your engineering. This is would be a big problem with why use of the protocol, that your money is just sitting in eventually it disappears and now you don't have money anymore. With public key quantum money, it turns out that we can solve the problem, and there are numerous other advantages. Pretty kind of the main. All right, now, maybe you're a little skeptical that quantum money will ever actually be used. After all, we have this, functioning digital economy. No one really seems to be complaining too much about it. And I think that's a valid criticism, but for one, I just think quantum money is a fascinating topic. It seems like a really foundational question. Can you maintain the no cloning theorem, even in the presence of the ability to verify your states that you are trying to? But beyond just being a study, I think there's a lot of other reasons to study quantum money. So one is that it's going to be a necessary stepping stone to even better, more interesting, more useful cryptographic objects. The main one I want to highlight is copy protection. So what is copy protection? This is also put by Scott Aronson. Basically, you want to replace our digital software with a unclonable quantum state, such that if you have this unclonable quantum state, you can run the software as desired, but you have no ability to actually copy the state. So you can't give the state to your friends to also enable them to only one person at a time is able to run the software. This solves a rather obvious problem I received for classical software. And there are some other examples of things quantum mining, quantum fingers that have various applications throughout cryptography. And the point I want to make is that if you realize any of these objects, you actually can use them to build quantum money generic. And so, like, in order to realize these objects, you kind of had to solve the quantum money problem, the public key quantum money problem alone. So even the public key quantum money in itself isn't going to ever be economically viable if you want these kind of more advanced objects to solve the quantum. And I think also just looking at the techniques and ideas that are developed in the context of quantum money is extremely useful and has been extremely useful. But for example, Wiseman's original theme was actually the original idea that led to quantum key distribution, which dominated the field of quantum protocols. And much more recently, there have been sort of other cryptographic tasks people have imagined, and they've imagined in the quantum setting, and these various works have actually leveraged techniques from quantum key. So one is certified deletion, which is basically you have a piece of quantum and you want to prove to an external party that you deleted your data. This has numerous applications in crypto. Classically, it's impossible, right? If I have my classical data, I could copy it somewhere else, delete it, prove to I deleted it, but you have no way of telling that I actually deleted my copy that I stored on some external device. But with quantum information, if your data is actually encoded in an unclonable quantum state, now this actually becomes. I think maybe another perspective that is perhaps even more surprising is that even failures from quantum money, as we'll see, there have been a lot of failures in the space of quantum money. Even failures to build quantum money have led to interesting positive outcomes. So a couple years ago, we showed how to build and justify the security of hash functions against quantum attacks. So this is back in the realm of classical cryptographic protocols, and we want to maintain security against quantum attacks. And what we showed is that some hash functions are in fact secure, and it turned out that the way we showed this was more or less by exploiting attacks on quantum money. So it was kind of maybe counterintuitive that somehow insecurity in one domain led to a security in another. And this actually also came up last year. I had this work on developing a new protocol for demonstrating quantum advantage. And actually, you can kind of look at that protocol. The original my original development of the protocol kind of came from me trying to solve this quantum problem. Turned out the quantum money scheme was insecure, so we turned that insecurity on its head to give a verified protocol. Okay, so hopefully I convinced you that quantum money is really cool object and worth of study. So now let's get into kind of the background of quantum money and really what's the core challenge. You know, why haven't we solved this? So the core challenge stems from the picture here. I mean, okay, so first there's this issue that we don't currently have quantum devices, so obviously we can't today, but I want to assume for the purpose of this talk we have a full-fledged quantum computer, not worried about any of the kind of technological issues. But even if we had a full-fledged quantum computer, we could do anything we cared for computation-wise. There's still a really fundamental barrier for achieving quantum, and it stems from the following issue. So, with public quantum money, we now have the ability publicly to verify banknotes. That's the whole piece. But this actually leads to an attack, right? So what you can do is generate just a random state on whatever number of qubits our banknotes are. Generate a random state and try to verify it. Most likely it'll fail. But if it succeeds, you actually know you have a valid banknote. So if it succeeds, now you say, I have a valid banknote, and I just broke the soundness of steam because I created a banknote. And if it fails, I just try again. And I just keep trying. And eventually I will actually get a valid banknote. And so what this says is that the ability to verify actually kind of tells you what the banknote is. You can eventually recover the banknote just given the ability to verify. And this is not something that was true of Wiseman's original protocol. Wiseman's original protocol, no matter okay, well let's pretend that you're not communicating with the mint to verify banknotes. If you just have the state on your own, there's nothing you can do. You recover the state from out of mind. This existence of what I'll call a brute force attack, that in itself isn't necessarily a problem. In fact, the whole field of cryptography is founded on things like this, where we have basically everything in cryptography is brute force attack that given enough time will break the protocol. But the observation is that this brute force attack is really, really slow. So the time for the brute force attack is essentially exponential in the number of qubits of your quantum space, which is huge. I looked up like how long till the heat death of the universe, and it's something like 2 to the 400 microseconds. So something on that scale, if you have like 400 qubits, the brute force attack you will still be running by the time the universe is over. So, even for modest-sized systems, this brute force attack is absolutely impractical. And so, in cryptography, what we do is we just say, well, I'm going to only ask for security against time-bound events. Adversaries will succeed in their task in a time that's relevant. Now, the problem is that whenever you have these brute force attacks that show that eventually you will break the system, it turns out that it opens up the possibility that there's more efficient attacks. And just given the current state of computer science and our understanding of complexity theory, we really can't rule out the existence of attacks. So whenever you have these brute force attacks, we don't know how to prove that there isn't something more efficient. Now again, this is a problem endemic to almost all cryptography, and we know what to do from decades of experience in cryptography. And the usual solution is you start somewhere, you make some computational assumption, you make some assumption that some problem is going to be intractable for the adversary to solve, and then under that assumption, you prove the security of your code. And then through this proof, you actually justify the security of your protocol under whatever assumptions. And so what you want for your underlying assumption is something that's been widely studied, had a lot of people trying to break it and failing. Having a whole community of researchers kind of agree that this is an intractable assumption. And once you have that together with your proof of security, now you convince that whole community that your protocol is accurate. I'll just give a brief description of what one of these assumptions might look like. It's not really relevant to the talk, but here's a common assumption that's assumed to be true for even quantum vectors, which is the shortest vector problem. So here I'm given a lattice, which is just a regular representative of pieces in high-dimensional space. Obviously, I can only represent two dimensions, so think of it as the dimensions of t and length. It's very hard to actually kind of visualize the geometry of this. And what you're given is a description of the lattice, say a basis P, so there's a set of points that such that integer combination of them will generate the whole lattice. And the task is to find the shortest vector distance in a little green arrow. So an assumption that we like to make in cryptography is that this problem is computationally tractable, that it'll take you until the end of the universe to solve this problem when you're inside. Obviously, 2D, this problem is easy, but so what you want is some problem like this. This problem has been studied for decades, mostly in the classical setting, but it's getting more attention in quantum setting as time goes on. People haven't been able to attack it so far. So the community has some sort of reasonable understanding that this could be a nice hard problem on which to base crypto on. So you want an assumption like this, and you want to be able to base a security report. Okay, so that's everything I've talked about before with computation security. This is something that is kind of, again, bread and butter of crypto. There's something that makes quantum money different. And what makes quantum money different is that, remember, we were relying on this information theoretic, no cloning theory. That really came from the information theory, came from understanding quantum states. And the no cloning theorem is no longer valid in the setting of quantum money. By no longer valid, I mean it does not apply to the states that we're considering in quantum money, because the states are information theoretically known, right? The brute force attack tells you that, at least from an information theoretic perspective, once I give you the public key, you actually know the state. It's going to take you a long time to actually find it, but it's known, it's determined by the information you have. And this just completely invalidates the assumptions under which the no cloning theorem. On the other hand, typical assumptions we use in crypto don't talk about cloning, right? The shortest vector problem I showed you on the last slide, there's a classical input, which is a description of a lattice, and a classical output, which is a shortest vector. There's nothing quantum about it. The only thing quantum about it is that we're asking for hardness. But there's no cloning when we talk about the underlying assumption. And so the kind of essential challenge in public quantum money is how do we justify some sort of computational no cloning theorem that says that even though there's an attacker that can run in trillions of years to break the scheme, that there's no efficient attack that can copy states. It can't come from the information theory, because information theoretically the state is determined and you can actually clone it. And it can't come from ideally it can't come from the crypto assumptions. The crypto assumptions we like to use in cryptography don't talk about them. So where does it come from? Somehow it comes from the combination of both information theory and cryptography. And this is, in my view, what makes quantum money quite a challenge. Okay, so I'm going to give kind of a brief overview of prior results in the quantum money space, and we'll see that this problem is actually manifested in there not being a lot of positive results. So I'm going to roughly group prior results into three categories. The first category are those whose security is basically just merely conjecture. So they said, here's a scheme. Good luck breaking it. I actually think this paper here, which has so far not been broken, I think that was their conclusion, was break it if you can. So there's a handful of these schemes. I even entered the parade here, and it turns out that a lot of them were not actually secure. So a group of people came up with a proposal, and they didn't know how to break it. But once the wider community got their hands on it, perhaps with significant effort, eventually it was broken. In many of these cases, there are a couple that have so far resisted cryptanalysis. I'll talk very briefly about this one. Later.
Mark? But when you say the broken, you mean like there's a more efficient?
Yes, yes, yeah, in computer science or in cryptography, what we consider as an efficient attack, like polynomial time attack, polynomial equivalence, as opposed to exponential. Yeah, so all these in red have a polynomial time. So relatively efficient. Okay, so the middle category here, I'm not going to really define it. I'll hopefully make this category a little more clear later. But these are the ones that have a proof, but it's not really a proof against some sort of computational system. It's a proof in a black box model. So basically, for these results, we pretend that the adversary works in a particular way. And once you kind of constrain the adversary to working in a particular way, you can start actually getting conditional results. Here though, like this seems at least a little better than just merely conjecturing the security. There's at least there's some justification. But it requires interpretation, and in particular, you know, how realistic is the assumption that you're making in the adversary? How realistic is your restriction on the kind of adversary you're considering? Are there adversaries that don't work? And for example, these two in yellow here actually corresponded to some of the merely conjectured ones. So like this Ernst and Cristiano scheme, they prove security relative to they prove security in black box model, but then it turned out that there were non-black box attacks that didn't work the way that they proved security against. They worked in a different way, and they were. Okay, and then on the far right here, we have what should be the gold standard in cryptography. It's giving a construction, and you prove security, assuming some nice, widely studied assumption that has gotten a lot of eyeballs and the community. But here too, it's just being in this column doesn't necessarily say that you should be happy, because there's still not really questioning how believable is the assumption. So in that column there, I showed using this thing called indistinguishability obfuscation, how to build quantum money. But if you ask any cryptographer, they would tell you that indistinguishability obfuscation is like the worst possible assumption. We at least believe it exists, but it's subject to being true. It's like one of the worst possible assumptions. It's like the least believable one. It's very new. Especially in the quantum setting, it's post-quantum security is not well understood.
What's the difference between the right-hand column and the left-hand column?
So this is the one, like I just came up with a scheme and just said, go first. And the right-hand column, we actually gave a proof under some assumption that cryptographers at large have said something existing. Not just I'm not basing security on this. I'm not just conjecturing the scheme secure. I'm saying if you could break my scheme, you could break this thing called indistinguishability obfuscation, which lots of people. And then there's kind of two oddballs down here that I won't really talk about the first one, the swappable invariance one. I'll mention it briefly. We prove security under some assumptions, but our proposals are incomplete, so we don't actually have a working protocol yet. And our assumptions are also maybe like kind of wrong. And then this one on the bottom here, which depending on time, we'll see how much I'm going to talk about it at the talk today. But that one actually kind of lives in between these two. It's both a proof in the black box model and I mean complicated as well. But the hope is that the combo of those might be a different trade-off relative. Okay, so what I want to do next is give kind of an overview of a very common approach toward realizing quantum mechanics, and hopefully make some of the things I'm talking about a little more. So one thing I'm gonna do for the rest of the talk is I'm gonna make a simplifying assumption that there's ever only one banknote in circulation. One banknote and that's it. Obviously, that's not very useful on its own. But fortunately, Ernst and Cristiano show that once you kind of solve this problem of constructing a quantum money scheme where there's only one banknote, you can lift it to a scheme where there's so we won't worry about that. We'll just focus on the case of this only ever seen. Okay, so the kind of abstract approach to building functionality starts out as follows. So the mint is going to choose some secret set S over, let's say, bit string, over some domain, it doesn't matter. Some secret very sparse subset S. And the bank node is just going to be a superposition over string S. Maybe it's uniform superposition, maybe it's right. Now somehow this is the part that, or one of the parts that's going to be non-trivial. Somehow the mint is going to construct a membership checking program. And what this membership checking program is going to do is it's going to allow you to check membership in the set S, but hopefully not reveal S. It'll allow you to check membership, but hopefully it hides S in some. And what the mint is going to do is going to publish this membership checking program. So we're going to assume everyone has now the membership checking program for S. And one person will have the. So the first part of this approach is a classical test, where what does Bob do? He just checks that the support of the banknote state is actually the set S. And you can do that with the membership testing program that the mint gave. So that's the kind of first step of this approach is this classical test. In the case of this Ernst-Cristiano scheme, the set is going to be a linear subspace of dimension n/2 for n in the main space. And then in the I mentioned this not based scheme. So here, earlier this year we kind of gave a more abstract view using invariance. So here, the set S is going to be the set of strings with the same invariant. So in the case of the not based scheme, so we interpret our domain as these knot diagrams. So I use pictures of knot diagram. I didn't draw this because of knot diagram down there. And there are these things called Alexander polynomials. And more generally, there's just a variety of these knot invariants that can kind of tell you whether two knots are equivalent or not, or if the knot invariant is different and you know your knots are different. So the set S are going to be the set of knot diagrams with the same invariant for some invariant that I won't choose with what value to invariant. And we also give another protocol based on elliptic curve, but as I said, that protocol actually. Okay, but there's a problem so far with this approach. There's a really simple attack. So what does the attacker do? If the attacker gets their hands on a banknote or on the banknote, they can just measure it. And what do they get when they measure the banknote? They get a value in this. They get some x. Well, x is just a classical. So the abstract can write it down twice, and you can just call those two copies of x. They look nothing like the original banknote, right? The original banknote might have been a superposition over all the elements in S. And these are just a singleton state. But he's just going to call them banknotes. And the thing is, well, all Bob does is he just checks for membership in the set S. So these things that the abstract is calling banknotes will actually pass Bob's verification here. And so the takeaway is that it's not hard enough it's not enough that the honest banknote is unclonable. You actually need to kind of look at what the verification will accept and make sure that no state that the verifier accepts is. And the problem with this, just having this kind of classical test of membership in S, is that there are trivially clonable states in that the verifier accepts. Okay, so what do? Well, what we do with this approach is we're going to layer on a superposition test. So we want to prevent this attack where the attacker measures the banknotes and then copies the result. And so to prevent the attack, what you need is to make sure that only the honest banknotes, say the uniform superposition for S, are accepted, or at least you want to make sure you reject all the singleton states. Okay, so in the Ernst-Cristiano scheme, the way this is done is you additionally, we already gave out the membership testing oracle for the subspace S. And what they rely on is the fact that subspaces behave really nicely under the quantum Fourier transform. So what they do is they additionally give out a membership testing program for the orthogonal subspace. And now what this membership testing program for the orthogonal subspace lets you do is it lets you actually verify that you're in superposition. So what you do is you take your banknote or supposed banknote, you perform the quantum Fourier transfer. If you had a singleton state, your quantum Fourier transfer gives you a uniform superposition over everything spaces, which will almost certainly not be in the orthogonal space. But if you had the honest banknote, where you actually had the uniform superposition over the subspace S, when you do the Fourier transform, you get the uniform superposition over S. And so you can use your membership testing workflow actually. And they showed first that actually the only state that passes both the classical and superposition test is in fact the honest banknote state. So that's a good thing. And then they proved this black box result, which says that if you as the attacker, all you do is basically make queries. So the attacker has MS and MS first, so they can test membership in MS first. Because everyone has. And what they showed is that if the attacker just kind of treats these as a black box, they just will query on points, see if those points are in S, maybe not. Maybe they query on superposition. If all the attacker does is just kind of treat these membership testing programs as black box, don't look at the code, just evaluate them, then in fact you can prove security. That's what they showed. And then what I showed is that if you use this thing called indistinguishability obfuscation, which is a form of obfuscation, it's a way to take a program and obfuscate it and hide secrets in code. If you apply the indistinguishability obfuscation to membership testing programs, then you could actually get security in the real world without having to make these kind of black boxes. So then even if the adversary looks at the code, then they can fix.
So doesn't running it through the oracle kind of destroy the state in some ways?
Well,
Or do you need multiple calls to the oracle?
So you run it on superposition, right? So concretely what you do is you kind of write the output of the function in the qubit and then you measure that qubit. And if you have the correct honest banknote state, this process actually won't mess up the state. Yeah, if you have a bad state, then your state might get messed up, but you kind of don't care what happens. Okay, for the not setting or more abstractly invariance, so here the superposition test, we need additionally some permutations that preserve the invariant. So in the case of non-crack diagrams, these are Reidemeister moves. So in the case of kind of moving the string of the knot diagram around without cutting it. And so we need a bunch of these permutations but the important thing is that the action of these permutations preserves the invariant. So even if you perturb it by these Reidemeister moves, you still end up with a knot diagram that has. And so what you do is you basically test that the state you were given is preserved by these permutations.
Just to clarify, is the right-hand side to say you can jump from one copy to many copies, or is the right-hand side also for the single copy of a node?
It's also just for the single copy. Right, so yeah, so you test that when you apply the invariance, when you apply these permutations that you don't actually change the banknote state. So if you have uniform superposition over all knot diagrams with the same invariant, if you permute those values, if you permute your superposition, you actually still have the same superposition. You're staying within the same support and all your weights are identical. On the other hand, if you had just a single knot diagram, and you apply any permutation, you map to a different knot diagram. And so your state actually is not preserved under action by these permutations. And so you can implement this test using invariant response. Yes.
Is it efficient for the bank to generate these banknotes?
So yes, what's not efficient is if I give you an invariant, you can't generate the uniform position over a diagram. What you can do is you can generate the uniform position over all knot diagrams. Compute the invariant, measure the invariant, and then your state collapses to the banknote, and then you publish your invariant. That's kind of the description of the sentence.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, so now I'll get into the new stuff. So for the rest of the talk, I'll talk about the result of mine, which is constructing quantum money from something called abelian group actions. So I'll describe what an abelian group action is on the next slide. But what an abelian group action is an abstraction of these things called isogenies over elliptic curve, or at least certain versions of isogenies over elliptic curves. And they're one of the main contenders for post-quantum stability. And so what we do here is we construct quantum money from these isogenies. But I don't worry about the underlying mathematics, the underlying isogenies. I'll just talk about the level of abstraction of an abelian. Okay, so what is an abelian group action? So I have an abelian group G, and I have a set X, and G acts on X via this operation star. And what we want out of star is that it kind of behaves nicely with the group operation. So if I take G star parentheses H star X, that's the same as first adding G to H and right use an additive notation. So that's the same as taking G plus H and then first act by H, then act by G. I could have also just act by H. Okay. So that's so this is abstractly what a group action is. We're going to make a few assumptions about our group action. So we're going to assume that our group action is I think it's usually called regular, but basically that this mapping from G and X into G star X and X. So this is a binomial. There's basically once I fix X, there's a one-to-one correspondence between group elements and set elements. I'm also going to assume that the set X is sparse. So the set X is going to live in kind of an ambient space of just general bit strings. And I'm going to assume that it's sparse, meaning that if I kind of just choose a random bit string, it's very unlikely to be X. But I want that I'm able to recognize when I actually talk. And then I'm also going to assume that everyone has kind of agreed on an explicit known to everyone starting element X. So there's this little x. From little x, you can kind of act on little x by G. You can kind of walk around the set big X. But the set big X is sparse. Okay. Now. So far I haven't talked about anything cryptographic, and I haven't talked about we need to make computations. This is not going to be the computational assumption I'm going to be making, but it's kind of the core hard problem that we hope for in any cryptographically useful group action. The assumptions I'm going to be making are even stronger than this, or in other words, attacking them. But the core assumption, I'll call it discrete log problem because it's analogous to sort of a classical problem of solving discrete log. It has other names as well. But what's the problem? So the problem is, remember this G comma X into the G star X X. Remember that we said that this is a bijection. And it's efficiently computable, just kind of by assumption. We're going to assume that the actual action star is efficient. But what we're going to hope is inefficient is going backwards, taking this bijection in the other direction. So if I give you G star X and X, it should be, we expect that it's infeasible for good cryptographically useful group actions. We expect that it's infeasible for you to recover G. Okay, so this is kind of the abstract structure we're going to assume. And as I said, we have candidate instantiations of this abstract structure using isogenies over curves. I won't go. Okay, so how do we mint things? So here's what the mint's going to do. They're first going to generate the uniform superposition over the group. Right? G is abelian, so this can be done with the Fourier transform. Then they compute the group actions, right? So remember, everyone has a starting element, little x, and what they're going to compute is superposition over G comma G star. Right? Just by computing the group actions. Now, the set X itself doesn't have any discernible structure that we can necessarily exploit, but the group does. And by applying the quantum Fourier transform over abelian groups, we can do that to the left right here. And now we get this state. So I'm gonna assume that for the purposes of this talk, I'll assume that my group is a cyclic group for capital N. And so the Fourier transform. So all this works for. Okay. And now what I do is I measure H here, and I get what's called in the literature, it's called the serial number. So I measure H, I get something called the serial number. This is what I published everyone. So everyone knows this little H value. And whatever's left in the right register, which I've written down there, that's my bank. So basically my banknote becomes this uniform superposition. So it's uniform superposition over G star X, where I picked up some base that depends on me. And because of the fact that we have this bijection between the group and the set, this is actually uniform superposition over the entire set X with some base. Right. So this is how the what it does to reduce their. Okay, so now the question is, how do we verify? Well, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to do this, you're going to do this test. You're going to make sure that the supported banknote is actually the set X, not something else. So that's step one. That's not the interesting part is that you're going to actually verify that the banknote is in the correct superposition. And we're going to do this as follows. So the first thing we're going to do, I'm going to write all the equations assuming that we actually have the correct banknote and show that you will kind of accept when you get to the end. And it's also possible to show if you have an incorrect banknote that this process. Okay, so the correct banknote is given up there. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create another uniform superposition. Okay, and I'm going to call the elements. And now you compute the group action superposition. It's like the one thing we can do, compute the group action. So I act by U on the G star X in the register. Right, so up here on the top is now this. Now I use the fact that the group action behaves nicely under the group operation to rewrite the U star G star X as U plus G star X. And now just by doing a change of variables, I can call U plus G, I can just call that G prime. And I can write my sum this way. And what we actually see by kind of factoring out this phase term here. So my phase term, there's a part that depends on G prime, and there's a part that depends on U. I can actually factor out the part that depends on U, and what's left on the right register is exactly the honest banknote. And on the left register, I get this superposition. Okay, so basically you can think of this as like a phase kickback sort of thing, where I kind of move phase from the right register to the left register. Now on the right register, presumably because the set has no discernible structure, I couldn't test for any phase information. But on the left register, where it's a superposition of the group, and I can use the group QFT and really groups, or really the inverse QFT. And actually, what will happen is I get exactly H serial number, and I can test for that. So if I'm given the honest banknote, I run through and I get H. This process will spit out H, and I just test that against the H that's been published and make sure I get this. And that's the program. Any questions? Okay, so now the fundamental question is going to be, what do we believe this is secure, and why should we believe this is secure? And it could be that it's insecure, but I want to try to convince you that it's that at least seems unlikely that it's. So first, just to give kind of a rough intuition for security, let's suppose that the discrete log is were actually easy. That taking this bijection and going in the reverse direction, computing g from x and g star x. Suppose that were easy. Well, then this protocol is completely easy. Why? Well, I can if that were the case, I can mint banknotes for free, basically. So what I do is I compute uniform superposition over all components. I act by the action. So I'm so far just kind of behaving like and now what I do is I know H, right? H is this public thing that the mint gave to. Why is it acronym H? I can add this space, and I can add this space because I know G kind of in the clear, right? It's sitting there as a group element in my register. I can easily add this space. And now what I do is I use the fact that the discrete longs are easy I uncompute this G from G star X. Right, like going in this direction is computing the discrete log problem. So I just do that in reverse. And I compute and I erase the G using my my ability to solve discrete logs, and I get this, and this is the actual honest thing. So if discrete logs are easy, just knowing the H, the serial number that the mint produced, I can compute a bank. Okay, so we need to at least assume that discrete logs are hard, in order, like, it's a minimal sum, right? Like, no matter what, we need to make sure at least that discrete logs are hard. Fortunately, on the group actions based on isogenies, this appears to be the case, so you know, that could change. But you know, as far as we know, this is okay, but I want to actually kind of convince you that this protocol is secure. It could be that even if discrete logs are hard, maybe there's some other attack. Maybe there's some clever thing you can do to break the protocol that even if discrete logs are, right? I can show that discrete logs are necessary, but not that there's. So what we proved is the following. What we prove is that under some assumption, I'll just call it assumption 1. Under assumption 1, the protocol is secure for black box group actions. So that means, so we have a black box model for group actions, which basically just says all you're allowed to do is kind of interact with the group action by, you know, compute the group action, compute the group operations, but you're kind of like, we've tied your hands, you can't do anything more sophisticated with the underlying implementation of the group action. Right, so okay, so this requires both the computational assumption and working in a black box model. So you know, maybe it's questionable, but what I want to argue for is that actually both the assumption and our black box model are kind of standard, or at least most standard things that are done in classical cryptography. So this assumption here, I've written the assumption here. Basically, you're given so x everyone knows, and you're given u star x for some u, and then either you're given 2 star. Well, let's forget the r for the moment, just x. You're either given u star x, or you're given for the same u that's in the second entry here, or you're just given a totally unrelated set. I needed to strengthen it a little. I you know, instead of x in the third entry, it's allowed to be r for some set and chosen. Now this assumption 1 actually has kind of a classical analog. It's related to a lot of these Diffie-Hellman type assumptions that are made in classical cryptography. So this assumption is at least in kind of the spectrum of cryptographic assumptions. It's going to be far more likely to be believed by cryptographers to say like distinguishable assumption. Still a new assumption. No one has made this assumption before. No one has looked at this particular problem, but it's related to problems that we've looked at. So, and then the black box assumption. And again, in classical cryptography, when we use things called relevant group actions groups, it is commonplace to kind of analyze the black box model or analyze things in the black box model. actions, it's similar to what we. Now, the other thing I want to point out is that the black box model and assumption one say nothing about cloning. So somehow I'm actually going to justify the unclonability here, based on kind of starting hardness assumption one of the black box model that's saying nothing about cloning. I also want to mention that no one has proven, this is the first time, as far as I know, that any post-quantum protocol or quantum protocol has had a proof relative to black box practice. Again, it's like very commonplace in classical crypto to make these black box assumptions, but this particular one is not really used quantumly. And the reason is actually the following. There's a good reason for why the black box model has not been, this particular black box model of actions quantumly, and why I needed an extra assumption. And it's the following, that actually the query complexity of the discrete log problem in group actions is efficient from a query perspective. So the number of group action operations you need in order to solve this discrete log problem is no. And this is just because group actions in particular kind of give you a dihedral-hidden subgroup problem. And you can use known algorithms for solving dihedral-hidden subgroup to impact these actions. Now, typical proofs in crypto, we either have what I call standard model, or what we call standard model proofs, which are these are the things I call gold standard proofs via a proof relative to some underlying assumption. Or we have black box model proofs in crypto also. But the black box model proofs typically work by just giving a direct proof where you lower bound the query complexity of solving some problem relative to your black box. And the query complexity lower bound kind of immediately gives you the time as well. But here, our query complexity lower bound is trivial, or it's low. It's not going to give us any meaningful hardness, just removing query complexity. So we need to additionally layer on, in addition to kind of working in the black box model, we need black box model alone in the group action setting. You always are going to need to layer on some sort of something. So we're going to need to use both. And this is the first work that does this. I don't think I really have time to go through the proof. Which is fine. Maybe I'll briefly go through the first steps. So let's assume I have some group action or assumptions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to construct a new group action that is just pairs of group elements. So I'm gonna take the second entry that I got, so I'll call Y from assumption U star X from assumption one. And I'll construct a new group action that's just where my new set is just a pair of set elements, and it just acts pairwise. And the point is that any black box adversary has to work no matter what the underlying group action does. So maybe I don't have to work on this group action. There's some caveats. I won't have time to talk about them. In fact, not true, but let's say pretend. And so we're going to assume for contradiction that we actually have an adversary that produces two banknotes, two valid banknotes. So yes, $1 and $2, and they're both valid banknotes with respect to this new group action. So this is blown out. And what we're going to do, I won't go through all the math. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to use our assumption. Remember, our assumption allowed us to kind of submit a set element R, and we either act on R by to U, where U is where Y is U star X, or by an unrelated. So we're going to feed this into the assumption, and we're going to get back some other. So we're going to take one of our copies. We're going to feed it into our assumption and get back some state. And through some mathematical manipulation, it turns out that in the case where our assumption gave us acted by 2U, we actually have the same. We actually have the same. I won't go through the math, but this is what happens. But if the assumption actually acted by something other than 2u, then the thing that you get through this process is actually orthogonal to the. And the thing is we can test, right? Because we have a second banknote, we have $2 that we haven't done anything. Right, so we assume that our arbitrary broke the scheme, give us $1.2. We acted on $1 in some way. And now what we do is we just test if it's still the same state that's contained in $2. And this will kind of this will actually enable us to distinguish the two cases of our assumption, whether we acted by 2u or acted by. And so this breaks the assumption, contradicting the fact that we can assume. Right, I think that's all I want to say about this protocol. I'll just end here.
Oh, maybe this is kind of a naive question, but I guess one of the successes of quantum computing is that it solves discrete, classical discrete log problem.
Yes.
Is there some reason to expect that it can't do quantum work?
Yeah, great question, So the classical discrete log problem solved by short logic. And if you recall for our talk about work is that you kind of needed a group multiplication in there. So a group action essentially what it allows you to do is allows me to exponentiate, but not actually combine, not actually multiply. So it does not appear that we can find now, as I said, from a complexity perspective, there were, we can actually solve the discrete log in kind of a low number of contraction operations. But kind of the intuition is that the intuition for why we expect the group action discrete log problem to be hard is that it seems closely related to that mediated subgroups. And people have been trying to solve that in subgroup with one another.
I have something speculative or physical and engineering activity, which is what would be future implementation look like? This is all worked out.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I guess maybe it's unclear and depends on exactly how or on physical and but what I guess I imagine that maybe it's a long time from now. We'll have devices, our cell phones will have quantum storage in them, ability to compute on them, and literally the quantum money state will just be state stored in whatever quantum storage on the device.
In the SIM card, they don't have a quantum state.
Yeah, maybe. Who knows?
You explain that it's discrete log is hard than minting the bank. The actual.
Oh, well, it's kind of the other way around. So discrete log is easy to maintain.
Oh, yes.
If discrete log is hard, it's unclear whether, so discrete log is a necessary thing. We encourage discrete log necessary. It's unclear if it's sufficient. This computer required a lot more, right? Both work in the black box model and also making a related computations. I remember it's a problem that is easier than discrete log. I had a slower.
But are there other, the set of things that will pass your error troubles, like the full set of.
Yeah, and
so
so
might be.
only the honest thing. That's the only thing that'll happen.
Oh, I see. That's the only.
That's the only thing.
So if you were to make this in practice, like this quantum state would need to be like an error corrected quantum state. And like, obviously, if you have an error corrected quantum state, you can sort of damage it a little bit and still recover it. Does that like change anything, or does it is it either valuable or as a resource or make it easier to attack the system?
I don't think so, I think. I don't think it makes it easier to, and as I said earlier, one of the things about public money is that we can actually kind of correct errors with it just by running the verifier, you will actually correct it. So you only need kind of error correction in order to be able to implement the operation that is there. And by running the verifier, you will always just correct errors. It shouldn't collapse.
So like, in this case, there was like one bill, I guess, you can always have multiple independent bills to have more money, but then they have a serial number, is there? Like, can you make it like so that the money is fungible as well, so that you can't distinguish between different bills?
There's been some work on this, this protocol does not achieve that, I think these are referred to as quantities.
Okay,
there have been some work on constructing these quantities. But yeah, that's layering on more trouble.
sure.
Let's end conference.